we have an amazing guest today um, with a really innovative idea and a white paper introduced by Praveen and Steve. And welcome, Scott Glenn. So,
Yeah. Glad to be
Hey,
here.
yeah, just be a minute while people join. But hi, Christine.
Steve. Hi, Lisa.
This is
hi, Christine. Good to see you. Yeah.
becoming like a book club or something where everybody knows each other.
Good. Well, we are kind of on a continuing journey. We're sort of having a an ongoing conversation about innovative models. About this all was born out of Praveen's organized reimagining bookstores convening. Was that 3 years ago now? Um, and Steve and I have been meeting mostly weekly since that time on something we call Beyond Bookstores, and then kind of took over the StoryBrand that Jill Hendricks, this space that Jill Hendricks had started. And, month to month, we're getting these scintillating guests who are bringing us. 2 months ago, Praveen and the team at Kepler's brought us some really interesting statistics and innovative practices that you've done at Kepler's for sustainability, and we learned from those and talked more about those last time. And then Praveen, you introduced us to Scott. Tell us why, as we're waiting for everybody to get into the room.
Well, I just stumbled onto Scott's great idea about this co-op on Facebook, actually. And I immediately saw it and I liked it. And I think we had a brief exchange, and then he sent me his white paper. And as I told him, I was just, blown away because I think it's exactly the kind of bold, out of the box, innovative thinking our industry needs. And I was just, thrilled that, he was thinking big and he was thinking bold, and he had laid it out, beautifully in his, white paper. And I thought, we need to get more eyes. We need more people talking about this. We need more people supporting what, Scott is trying to do. So that's all I got to say.
Well, it's interesting because Praveen, because you can sort of connect the dots here, which is hey Sherry, can you mute yourself? Because you've been talking a lot, obviously, about the living wage for bookstore workers. And Lisa and I have been, amplifying that by saying, well, the bookstores have to make money in order to be able to pay reasonable wages. They're not particularly well run always in a business-like way. They're great in other ways, community and book literacy ways.
Mhm.
And so what Scott's come up with is a plan that would actually help them become more profitable by working together, which I think is quite interesting.
Yep.
When you say profitable with bookstores, I know it's a contradiction in terms, but I mean at least far more healthy and sustainable.
So,
Sustainable. Yeah, that's good.
so Steve, let's introduce Scott properly and get this conversation going. A lot of people watch this in after the effect, so we're really creating a repository in this space of content, and it's going to be rich today.
Do
So,
you want to, yeah, do you want to talk about what your day job is and then also and the nature of Pioneer Books, your bookstore in Provo, Utah, and then about
Sure.
how you came to this great paper that we're going to talk about?
Oh, yeah, I've worked at Pioneer Book in Provo, Utah, just south of Salt Lake, for 11 years. The store started in 1980, so we're celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. We are a traditional secondhand bookstore. We've got about 6,000 square feet of retail space, and we've got about, at any given point, we bounce around about 40,000 titles on the floor. Um, by far, my biggest expenses are my labor expense and my rent. Running a used bookstore is pretty labor intensive. We catalog every book, we grade every book, we price every book individually, and we've got a lot of titles on hand at any given time. Um, yeah, what else can I tell you?
Well, about the bookstore, Scott, how how many people does it take to well, how many books flow in and out, and how many people does it take to catalog them?
It's a Sisyphean task, right? It's a constant pushing of the boulder up the hill. Every time we think we're done, it starts over. Um, yeah, I've got 4.5 employees. And we typically have one person working the front desk, and they are cataloging as they're helping customers. And then we've got other people that are shelving. Usually, at any given time, we've got 2 to 2.5 employees working, except on the weekends when the whole staff is on call on board. Um, but yeah, it's a constant effort. We see thousands and thousands of books every week. We don't keep everything that people bring to us. Of course, we can't take everything. But we sell well over 1,000 books a week, and we catalog and shelve with well over 1,000 books a week.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really
So
amazing.
let's talk about how this innovative idea of yours and the white paper. Can you walk us through kind of what got you there, and then start to unpack the elements of the paper itself?
Yeah. So we're calling it CommonShelf. It's just kind of a working title for the white paper and for the group. My background is in business. I've got an MBA from Brigham Young University, and my first job was working for a roller coaster manufacturer, and it was a small manufacturing business. They did factory automation for seatbelt or for the company that builds airbag deployers. And
I used to work for TRW, Vehicle Safety Systems, airbag division, launching airbags. So we were probably connected back there in the 90s.
yeah, so this was Autolead was their big customer.
Oh yeah, yeah. I worked with Autolead.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry.
So they did things really in a very innovative way. They practiced open book accounting, which is that they told the employees where every dollar went. The only thing that they didn't share was individual salaries, but they aggregated salaries and shared that information with the employees. And so the employees knew uh, if we were making money, how we were making money, what they were contributing, and they knew the profitability of every project that we were working on. Anyways, it was a really innovative experience, and I left that company feeling like this is the way that a business should be run. And then I kind of ran into a book about cooperative ventures, and I just fell in love with the idea, and I've had a passion for it ever since, and I've tried to bring elements of it to things that wherever I've gone. And for the last 11 years, this has been percolating. It's kind of been bubbling up in my consciousness, and I've been thinking about how could bookstores work together and maintain their indie spirit. And I I really think that the inspiration for CommonShelf came from Ace Hardware. Ace Hardware was founded as a wholesaler in the early 1900s, and then didn't really convert into a traditional cooperative until the 1970s. But they became a cooperative, and I can't remember exactly how many. I've got it written down here somewhere. How many stores now belong to the Ace Hardware Cooperative? But they were facing a lot of the same challenges that bookstores face: thin margins, tech challenges, rising costs. And instead of reinventing the wheel on things like point of sale systems or vendor negotiations or marketing, they let the co-op let them pool resources and own the solutions together. And so Ace Hardware is a cooperative. It's owned by its member stores. Um, and that's the vision for a cooperative for bookstores, is to manage things together in a way that makes sense, and to continue operating independently to maintain the spirit of indie bookstores.
What was the book that inspired you? You didn't name it. Let's see. I'd love to name it.
It's a book that was specific to it was written for a Mormon audience. It was called Working Towards Zion, and
Work.
it really delved into the oh, and I'm going to forget the name, but it's the cooperative in Spain.
You're talking about the,
Anybody?
oh, now I'm blanking too. BYU grad here.
How are you? Yeah,
The
it'll come to me.
1800s, all the town cooperatives and that kind of thing.
Yes, yeah. And it's a
So,
really inspiring story. It's now one of the largest companies in Spain, but it's cooperative, owned by its members, by it's owned by the employees.
and there are 5,600 Ace Hardware stores.
Yeah,
So
that's what I
600. Yeah.
5,600. So Scott, walk us through. You wrote a white paper, which we're going to share, and walk us through the key elements of that white paper. How you have reimagined how the answer to your question about how we work together and maintain our indie spirit.
Sure. Um, so at this point, it's early days, right? And the white paper was the salvo, was the try to launch the conversation, because I think the cooperative spirit demands cooperation, right? And it demands getting input from lots of people. I don't have all the solutions. I don't have all the ideas. And so what I really wanted to do was I wanted to invite um, people to join the conversation. And so some of the ideas that we suggested early on were that the co-op could offer collective buying deals on supplies, on shipping, and of course on books, but on sidelines as well. There was a suggestion that we could share some infrastructure, point of sale system, e-commerce tools, marketing assets. We suggested that we could share training and workshops. And then, of course, the way cooperatives work is there's an investment by each member. It's the same for each member, regardless of how many. Well, this is one of the points that's up for conversation. Is it scaled by size or number of locations or number of employees or square footage, or is it? But there's an upfront investment. That investment entitles you to ownership in the cooperative, and then the cooperative um, pays patronage refunds based on use. So if you're a big user of the cooperative, you'll see a larger patronage refund at the end of the year, at the end of the financial year. The,
So
the co-op is governed democratically, so each member has one vote. It has an elected board of directors, and then would have some hired staff to run day-to-day operations. And at this stage, I'm looking for people who are equally passionate about the idea, who are interested in participating in what we're calling the founding circle, and we're gathering input. And one of the ways that we've gathered input is through a survey, which I'd like to invite everybody to participate in, and maybe we can share the links. I don't have a copy of it.
I think I
But
do.
maybe when
I'll
we
go look, Scott. I think you gave me a copy, and if I find it, I'll put it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll send it out afterwards.
Great. That'll be great, Steve. Um,
I wanted to ask.
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, to what extent would partners be? Boy, this raises a lot of questions. I'll start by saying that. I was the treasurer of a co-op in New York City, but it was a real estate co-op where we all lived in the same building. And the board meetings were very intricate, were very challenging at times. But that's New York real estate, which is very different than a bookstore. How do you see partners like Ingram, who a lot of the bookstore owners use for distribution, or bookshop.org, who a lot of people use as an alternative to Amazon? Do you see organizations like that as helpful or useful?
Absolutely. Yeah, Bookshop's been a game changer, I think, for a lot of bookstores. Um, we have our own website, but we don't sell new books. So all of our new book sales go through bookshop.org, and that's been a great resource. Um, I I'm operating at a little bit of a disability or a disadvantage rather when it comes to sourcing new books because there are only a handful of titles that I buy for the bookstore. We buy some classics that we just can't keep in stock, things like Dostoevsky and Dickens and um,
All the D words.
titles. Yeah, all the D's, all the classics that we just can't manage to keep in stock. We buy new, but that's the only new books that we source. And so I'm looking to learn from other participants and from other members of this founders circle on how we could be operating together, how how um, how we could be sharing resources, how we could be leveraging our strength as a group in negotiations with suppliers and such.
Yeah, I'm wondering if anybody has inside information on how much Ingram provides savings to independent bookstores by their buying power. I don't, even though I'm chair of a publisher, Heyday Books, and I know a lot of bookstores, I don't really know the answer to that. Does anybody know the answer to that? Do bookstores get an advantage in price by working through Ingram?
No, we actually pay higher prices than what I mean. The same book, if you buy from publisher, is cheaper. We pay a lower cost for the book, but when we buy it from Ingram, we pay slightly more because Ingram, as a middleman, has to cover its own overhead, and I'm pretty sure, and I know for a fact that that they get as a wholesaler distributor that they get better discounts from publishers than bookstores do. But the additional discount they get, they have to basically cover their own costs, so they don't really pass that on. In fact, they
Right.
mark it up, to bookstores. So, on average, and I'm happy to talk about the numbers here because they're pretty similar or almost the same for most bookstores. Um, when we're buying a new book from a publisher, typically we would get 46 points of margin. So a $10 book list price would cost us $5.40. For the publisher it would bill us for, and the incoming freight is generally free. They don't charge us for the incoming shipping or anything like that. But the same book, when we buy it from Ingram, generally we're paying $6 for that. It's and then depending on volume and so on, that cost can go down to as much as from 60% to 58%. But generally, we're paying like 4 to 6 points, more when we are buying from Ingram.
And that counts whether you're buying POD or whether you're buying something that's out of their backlist that they may have gotten. So Ingram, my understanding is they split the discounts they get. They get their money about 70% from the publishers where they're getting the discount, and about 30% for the charge they're making to the independent bookseller. So everybody is chipping in for Ingram's sustainability, and so it's not a better model in that way. It's a better model in the fact that they are organizing a good model that they're organizing, especially extensive backlist material.
Well, also that they have sales reps in regional areas, so you're paying for those sales reps to go out and, for publishers, that's a big advantage. Is, when we have Ingram from bookstores, there's the convenience of sales reps and their catalogs and recommendations, I suppose, which we're also paying for.
Well, Scott, let's go back a little bit to the advantages that you see in a cooperative. So I want to make sure we fully understand before we start problem solving how it would work. What is it that you envision that would be, and have you thought through that vision only for used books or for any model? I mean, if it's only for used books, we can just talk about your vision for that model.
Thanks for asking that. I primarily was thinking of this as a model for new bookstores.
Okay.
I of course I have a selfish interest in making sure that it would be useful to me too. But I think so far.
Steve, I believe
I'm sorry, I muted her.
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
There we go. But I think so far the responses that I've gotten from the survey and from the conversations that we've had on Facebook, the starting point for most people is getting cost of goods sold down. So the negotiating power that we would have as a group with suppliers is the primary interest. And I think that the other things that I mentioned, shared infrastructure, maybe some shared trainings, some shared marketing, those things are all secondary or tertiary in nature.
So you're really focused on the cost of goods sold and negotiating with the publishers, aside from Ingram going to a Hachette or something and having a similar buying power to Barnes and Noble or something like that. Is that your thought?
Yes, that's the vision, is that we would have the buying power of a larger player for smaller participants.
Praveen, have you, in your exploration of the cost of books, which I know you've been an advocate of trying to deal with publishers' inflexibility about cost, have you thought about this? Does it apply in a way to what you're thinking?
Yeah, I've thought about it a little bit, and I also got the benefit of seeing the situation from the vantage point of a publisher when I got the opportunity to be the CEO of Barracola Publishers last year, and so I think my view, and I've been in countless conversations over the last 15 years where a group of booksellers generally, with the ABAs, support or something, will essentially, make a pitch, to a big publisher or one of the big five about, look, we add so much value to your business, blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't it be great if you could just give us, a few more points of margin? And the publishers say, here's a free cocktail. We love you, blah, blah, blah. But sorry, the answer to more margin is no. and, and after, just witnessing a gazillion of those conversations, my, rather simplistic, framing of that is it's a power play. The big publishers have absolutely nothing to gain in terms of the bottom line by giving more margin to independent bookstores. So why would they? The current system is working totally fine for them. However, I think a lot of the small and independent publishers could be a lot more open to the argument to begin this, journey. Um, as an example, a company like Barracola, um, uh, which is like a small mid-size publisher, is becoming increasingly dependent on Amazon. More and more of the sales every year are going through Amazon, and that creates just a vicious cycle where you end up starting to make decisions about the design of your book and the pricing of your book to cater to that audience that you're going to find through Amazon. And then over the last few years, they're not just basically paying Amazon higher discounts and co-op fees. They're having to pay money to advertise their books on Amazon because books that used to get discovered on Amazon automatically, now Amazon has built a huge multi-billion dollar advertising business, and they want you to basically do Amazon ads to get your books, discovered. So it's just basically like a giant sucking sound that all the independent publishers are seeing about, their increasing dependence on Amazon. And I think a group of independent bookstores through a mechanism like what Scott is talking about would have a lot more immediate benefits and leverage to start negotiating with a lot of small, medium, independent publishers, university presses, because they have real pain points.
So,
So
Praveen, do you see as the primary advantage of Scott's proposal, the thing that you found most interesting, being that negotiating power for cost of goods sold? That's the underscore?
well, the co-op could also focus on other non-cost of goods sold items, surely on supplies or technology or other things. But if Scott's survey and research is showing that most people are looking at the big kind of cost, the biggest cost in the P&Ls, which is the cost of goods sold, then maybe that's one to focus on. So I'm not sure I've concluded that in my own mind whether we should go after the hardest thing first, because this one is going to be hard. A lot of times there's a advantage, Scott, in just declaring some early wins, and the early wins might actually come from non-cost of goods sold items, or actually it could even be cost of goods sold, but it might be on sidelines or cards or one of those categories, where the product is a lot more undifferentiated. Because literally, like going to Penguin Random House and trying to negotiate lower discount is going to be hard, because they have Margaret Atwood, and they have the premium author. They're like, these are the books. You want these books, you have to come to us. But if you're buying like a sideline item, or like a pen or a pencil or a greeting card or something, I think there's a lot more choices, and those vendors are not all that much, there's less differentiation. So that might be one place to focus. Anyway, I'm talking too much. I should shut up.
No,
That's great feedback.
And I agree. The book, I like to call them book adjacencies, because they're in the store for a reason. They're not just randomly on the side, but they're like there. So there we have local sourcing that I see the collaborative market. If you were part of a co-op that was regional in nature, and you were doing some, like here I am in Tennessee, and I have 7 surrounding states. If I called that TVA region and set up a co-op within that region, I could be sourcing those book adjacencies, everything from cards to stationery to pens to other things from that region, and kind of regionalizing shipping and a lot of other things that could be margin leading. So I can see that being a real opportunity. And I said I wasn't going to speak of it, but before we were meeting, Scott and I were talking about, I've been investigating something called Circle POS, which is in New Zealand and Australia, pretty much saturated the market. And it's an open Linux system POS that's based on this idea of collaboration. So it's everybody is collaborating, everybody is sharing their inventory. So people online can buy out of a different store's inventory, and both stores benefit. It's sort of like bookshop.org on steroids, but the stores are holding the inventory, and they collaboratively, I won't go into how they do what they do, but when you had this proposal, I thought, because in America, that's a really hard thing for us to get our head around. So
Yeah, I think that a couple of points. I think that the Ace Hardware store model is imperfect in one way, in that the stores don't share hardware. It comes from, Ace's own system, whatever it is, warehouses. Whereas somebody like Napa, just being a car guy, Napa does. They share between their stores. So it'd be interesting to look at models in other areas and how they've made it work. And probably the most important thing, this is what, Lisa, you and I know about what Mike Manello always said, my former creative director partner, was, I'm not interested in ideas unless you can explain to me how they're going to start and work. Enough theory already, he always used to say. And I think this is a great theory and great idea, but the question really is there a small way of starting a co-op that doesn't rely on challenging publishers or big networks that are profitable, like like the distributors? Um, and is there something like Sidelines that is more common and prices could be affected by that? And I don't know the answer to that, but it strikes me that bookstores, depending on the region, have very different sideline products. Like even in my state in California, in the Copperfield bookstores, you go into them, what they sell is sidelines and cards and all sorts of toys and various puzzles and things is pretty different depending on which of their 9 stores you go to. And so it would be hard for the even within that system to cooperate too much. But it does seem like it needs something like that, small, to get your toe in and prove that stores can work together.
Yeah.
Scott, have you thought about that anymore in terms of what you could start with?
No, I've been thinking about all of these things. The reason that I was focusing on the cost of goods sold with publishers was because that was the feedback I got. It's clearly the big target,
Yeah.
right? But I do think you're right, and I think Praveen's right that small wins, early wins would be beneficial to the vitality of a co-op.
Any thoughts on what those might be?
Here again, I'm at a disadvantage because we do not carry sidelines in my store.
Yeah.
We are just a used bookstore, and so I'm relying on other people's experiences to suggest targets.
What among you bookstore owners, Lisa and Stacy and people, and managers, what do you think in terms of starting with sidelines?
This is Sherry. I think sidelines is less of a concern because we have better control of the margins over those things than we do of books. So sidelines is kind of what we use to beef up overall margins.
So
Yeah,
you're already finding success in the non-book or book
Yeah,
adjacency.
exactly. Doing the sideline, we do them as part of our blind dates and do them on fair and things. And so we have, we're 50% or better margin on our sidelines, which makes up for the lesser percentage, the lesser margins on books.
I wonder, I have an idea. I'd like to ask, oh, Sarah, go ahead and let's start with you and I'll get back to my idea.
I Not sidelines, which I do carry now, but I didn't always carry them. The margin is good, but what I have discovered with sidelines is that there are going to be people who come in your store who are just simply not going to buy a book.
Yeah.
And if you have sidelines, they'll find something to buy, whether it's box reading cards or puzzles or, tarot cards or, to me, that is my big discovery is that, wow, I really sell a lot of sidelines and these people have chosen not to buy a book because they know they're not going to read it.
Yeah, I consider our book adjacencies our gateway offerings for readers who are not readers. So they discover something that puts them in the book reading spirit, or even if they're writing with their hands and doing pencils, or even if they're getting outside with their dog and they might buy a picture book or something. But it's yeah, it's a real helpful thing. We
For
had
me,
several.
oh,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
I
no,
was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, for me, our sidelines are not so much for non-readers as for people who have two big TBRs and still want to buy something to support us. And most of the third largest category I sold last year was stickers. And most of our stickers are like bookish identity kind of stickers. Like I can express my bookish identity with these stickers. But I was going to say, as far as sidelines go, we do a lot with local makers and small makers for things like stickers and cards and stuff like that, and trying to get a better margin out of a small business would be a struggle.
It's interesting. Hey, Stacey, here's a really impolite question. Are you RB Books?
No, Curious Cat.
Yeah, that's right. You're curious cat. So RB Books had something, and I don't know who. I've forgotten who that is. I was going to go look at the database, but what the heck? Um, what RB Books? Do you want to? Who are you, and what did you want to say? Because I know you've been on before and had some good ideas.
So my name's Beth. I own R&B used books. And what we started doing was we hooked up with another used bookstore. I mentored a used bookstore in Peoria, Illinois, and she like far surpassed me. It was amazing. So she is now mentoring me, and we got a sublimation machine, and a whole bunch of other equipment, and we make the majority of our sidelines in-house. So our margins are actually pretty amazing.
What are the sidelines that you're making in-house?
We do mugs, we do metal tumblers, glass tumblers, we do totes. We're looking at adding in t-shirts and stuff like that. We do our own stickers, we do our own bookmarks, stuff like that.
What percentage of your business does that bring in terms of revenue?
We're still fairly new at it. So we haven't really looked at those numbers yet. We do we're starting to do a lot of offsites and pop-ups. And so the majority of our sideline sales are actually coming off-site.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. One of the other areas that you outline, Scott, in your paper, that's fascinating is software. And Lisa's been talking, about the New Zealand, Australia software system, POS system that would facilitate sharing. Um, I wonder if there's a program like that people struggle with, like membership, which Praveen and a lot of other bookstores have started to use because it's not only profitable, the useful life of a membership is 2 or 3 years at least. Because as long as you design a system that's one that people have to opt out rather than having to remind them, do they want to opt in? Um, and I wonder if there's some way of starting a program that way cooperatively that would assist people with the software and program necessary to follow up with emails and usage or something like that. Lisa, what do you think?
I'm not sure. I still want to hear from a couple of others. There's some real good questions in our
Oh yeah, there are new questions. Yeah.
and I think the swipe fees, some of the other things, the technology. One of the questions that I'm lingering on is this question of what would our buying power have to be in order to be the equivalent of Barnes and Noble? And it's pretty clear that even if we put together all the indies in the nation, that we could not, we're still only less than 10% of their total sales as an independent, as a market. So even if we put all of our market together, we're not going to come close to the buying power of Barnes and Noble or their sales on Amazon. So I think we need some of the rest of, because the rest of your white paper has other kinds of advantages. It's a little bit, I mean, Ace Hardware has 5,600 stores, and then there's lots of indie hardware stores. They're not going to be as good for sales of screw sets as Amazon is, but they still have some collective power. And I think there might be some subtleties or some nuances in their collaboration that are worth exploring for us beyond the cost of goods sold equation. I feel like we need to look in some of these other corners where our advantages lie.
Does anybody else use Basil that's on the call? We use Basil.
And I know a lot about
as our point of sale
If you raise
system.
your hand.
Yeah.
But talk about Basil.
I found that having a robust point of sale system that handled a lot of things like our loyalty program and that handled trade and such was really helpful. We've used Basil. We're kind of stuck with it now because we've used it for 10 years and we've got tons and tons of data in it that would be hard to move out. But and that's probably true for people that use Book Manager or that use some of these other popular systems. You get kind of tied to it.
Yeah, everybody does go in deep, and because it appears to have been, the code appears to have been written sometime in the late 1900s. It's
By
it's
Scribners.
well, and I'm so grateful that it has, because no great software company wanting to make bunches of money is going to invest lots of R&D in writing code for indie booksellers, and it really requires some unique functionality to do it well. We have anthology, and like I said, I've been looking at Circle for the last year, because the idea of transitioning to anything is quite an undertaking. So it's a big deal, the idea, but I am intrigued with it, and I think it's worth staying in. Are there other, because we know turns are important, we know returns and the ability to service a customer. Sarah, you pointed out people are buying things with just because they want to be loyal to the store, and as a sense of community, they want to invest. So if we don't have it in store, but we had a collaborative of sorts, could that help us fulfill the order for a loyal customer?
Yeah, I think that one sort of related model is that there's a number of us at Heyday Books, where I'm on the board, that we buy our books through a local bookstore out on the coast, Point Reyes Station bookstore. And so we've chosen a bookstore to support in our area, and it doesn't cost us anymore. It takes a little bit more time, and we have to drive down there, but it's a great place to visit. It's a great town. So in some ways, that kind of loyalty you're talking about, Lisa, is an important attribute to capitalize on. And the word co-op implies some sort of democratic, mission-driven program anyway. There may be something there. Sherry, did you want to talk about what you asked about in the or pointed out in the chat?
Yeah, I was just wondering if anyone has checked with, and I don't think that, no, sorry, not, don't think that we would meet the obviously the threshold of a Target or a Costco necessarily, but what is the threshold that they would require for us to get a bigger buying discount? Somebody has to have that number
Yeah.
from the individual publishers. And so, in other words, if that were, what thresholds would we have to meet to have that kind of buying power?
Yeah.
A great question.
And that's a question.
And I mean, that goes for
In a
swipe
minute
fees as
on,
well.
on AI. We could easily, I could ask Perplexity while we're talking.
Well, as far as a small publisher like Lee and Low, which is where I work at my day job, it would probably have to match the kind of scale that, for example, a school district buying in bulk would. So it wouldn't need to match B&N, but it would have to match like 17 schools buying, I don't know. I don't know the number because that's not my thing, but I do know that it would be like classroom set library kind of scale.
Yeah, that's an interesting parallel model, because I know that the publisher where I am, we offer fairly big discounts for educational buys. So I suspect, because there are only 3 or 4 big chains, all run by James Daunt, by the way, that we still would have some influence, I suspect. They don't get a lot of, aggregations of 20, 30 independent bookstores coming to them as a group to buy something from publishers. Praveen, you asked a question about big box bookstores. Is there anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, the other related thing to look at, Scott, would be the IBC, which is the Independent Bookstores Consortium. I believe they have tried, and they do some level of cooperative buying between their member stores. And last I looked, there were maybe like 20 or 30 bookstores, that were, part of that. They have a website. So if you just Google Independent Bookstore Consortium, you can see all the bookstores that are members of that, and it is. Um, and it has an interesting model. It's set up as a company. I don't think it's technically a co-op. It's a company that people have to buy into when they join, and the invitations. You have to be invited to join that. It's run it's run a little bit like a private club. They're not very open, kind of almost to the point of being a secretive. And so I think it's a different, driven by a different set of kind of like mission and values and what you're thinking about. But they have tried, and they've been at it a long time, and they're focused on bookstores, and they have tried cooperative buying. So it'd be worth a conversation with some of those people to see just what have they learned from trying to do cooperative buying for 20 or 30 stores over a period of several decades that they've been at it, and hopefully they'll be able to share at least some high level learnings.
I haven't run across them. And you said the IBC stands for Independent Bookstore Consortium?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's a good. I'd love to talk to them.
Brad at Booksmart, did you have a question? You posted something. He's off selling books.
I think that the IBC has been largely about identifying shared training and leadership and concepts, best practices more or less, more than really buying power, but it is worth an ask. And like I say, I just don't think the math works for us in terms of our buying power. That's what's got me puzzled is like but I do think I see that in hardware stores and the power of shared, thought and inventory and other things that may be worth as much to the bottom line as those cost of goods discounts. So thinking back to our lean days of automotive adjacent and that kind of thing, it's like often some of the most powerful bottom line building things are not in the cost of goods sold, but in all the other activity.
And the adjacent things. Yeah.
Yeah. Will had a question, I think. Will, did you want to ask something?
I just wanted to chime in. Hi, Steve. Hi, Lisa. It's nice to see you. Scott, nice to meet you over Zoom.
Nice to meet you, Will.
Just been listening. Just a couple thoughts I wanted to throw in on my end. I wonder about the governance and the one bookstore, one vote. I mean, maybe I'll say at the top, I think the promise of this is tremendous, and I think I appreciate the idea we have all these independent bookstores just kind of on an island. I agree. There's really something compelling about could we pull together for them to be collectively stronger. I wonder about the governance. I've attended the ABA only once, but the ABA Winter Institute, but I do wonder about potentially over democratizing tactical decisions. And I just wonder when you get a lot of bookstores in a room, how easy it is to come to some of these decisions at this moment. And so that's sort of just an open question is how that would work. Echoing Lisa, Praveen, it would be one thing if there was just a tiered system where it was like for publishers, this many orders means now you get a step up in discount. But I'm not sure that that's the reality. I think that if you're asking folks to put in an equity stake, I think ideally you want to have some reasonable guarantee that whether it's the return window or the terms that you're going to get that payback on the cost of goods sold, which is what you're trying to bring down. So that's kind of obviously an open question we've talked about. I think the POS and the tech fragmentation is really interesting, but I think one of the problems is highlighted is like Anthology, Book Manager, Booklog, Square. The environment is totally fragmented. If you just had one platform that could come together and capture all of the swipe fees, that might even pay for the whole system. But the problem is like everyone is on their own system, and I don't think anyone is. It's a big decision, I think, again, I'm not a bookseller. I'm just, a guy in his room here who thinks about bookstores, but it's a big decision to move from anthology, which all your staff is trained on, to another system. And I think you folks are going to want to feel like whoever runs that system, that tech is really in their wheelhouse. And it's not clear to me, and for folks that are in the bookstore world, that they are sort of, they are maybe the most ideal folks to build this. I've heard Allison Hill at the ABA talk about Andy at bookshop.org, and I know he's talked about wanting to launch a POS system, and that feels to me like he's got the brand, he's got some reasonable amount of buy-in from bookstores that he could get a percentage. But anyway, so I think that's both promising and challenging. I'm curious about the numbers, like if there's a Scott, if there's a suggested equity contribution that you're thinking per store, the number of stores, and then, how much money it would take to get to power the kind of infrastructure that you're thinking. And then just the last thing I'm thinking about is employees and expectations around wages and benefits. If you have a collective that has all these different stores that offer different packages in terms of wages, in terms of benefits, at some point, does this upset the apple cart a little bit? Where now folks are thinking, if we've got a cooperative, what about employee wages? What about benefits? I think those are interesting things to think about cooperatizing, but I could also see that potentially getting complicated. So anyway, I read the white paper, just wanted to share those thoughts.
Those are helpful feedback. I think let's start. The last thing that you mentioned about benefits is one of the areas where I think that we could come together, whether it's insurance costs, health insurance, or property insurance, or but some expenses like that. Maybe as a bigger player, we could offer some things that we can't offer as small independent bookstores.
Yeah,
so that's really interesting to me.
Scott, one of the successes I know about in cooperation was the freelancers union in New York City, which had nothing to do with the AFL-CIO. It was just sort of an independent group. And their Trojan horse, the way they got a lot of people in, to use a cliche, was health insurance. Because they figured out something that most freelancers were missing by being freelancers, which analogously we would think about what are independent bookstores missing by being independent. And they used that to get a lot of members, and then they added a lot of services on beyond that.
To Will's point about democracy, cooperatives are run democratically, and democracy is messy.
The thing to know
I don't think there's any way to avoid it, really.
The thing to know about that Editorial Freelancers Association is that you had to live in New York to be able to get the insurance. The insurance across state lines was the big challenge for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which would be a challenge here too.
Well, and still, so long as we do have affordable health care and we have under 50 employees and can participate that way, it remains the best in class choice, the best available health care for the least cost. So I think there's a huge education piece in that for people who aren't leveraging. But if that goes away or something changes about that, then the alternative would make very valuable an in-state collaboration or something else that would allow either a Coursera or something. Will, you mentioned Will and Will both have a lot of experience at this point, or some experience with cohorts, and I'm curious as to anything that you find valuable about the cohort that would transfer to a cooperative environment.
Is that for both Wills?
Yeah, for either Will. So
two Wills, no waiting.
Lessons learned from the cohort. And of course, the cohort has been largely focused on nonprofit hybrids and nonprofit models. But I think there are probably some things that you've learned specifically from working with cohorts that are helpful and not helpful, or you've made accessible some resources. How many of them are getting those resources? It's sort of a good test space for what we're talking about here.
Well, a couple of things. I'll say, we were inspired by Praveen in a lot of ways, and what Praveen did at Kepler's, and wanting to, think about if we could play a role in helping more stores to be eligible for grants and donations to power some of the work that they do that is not the retail, that's everything else, the author events, the children's story times, the book giveaways, the community building. And so that's been one of our focus areas, is just making it easier and more seamless for bookstores to be eligible for those grants and donations. I think that someone in the chat mentioned, author events as as something that could benefit from some greater infrastructure or scale or cooperation. And I think that's something our cohorts are thinking about, is if we've got a few bookstores in Oklahoma or a few bookstores in Texas, is there a world where bookstores can be greater than the sum of their parts, and maybe cajole publishers to bring a little more to the table in terms of like getting some of these authors around America? I think that's something that could benefit greatly from. But I guess if I'm being frank, I think we're still really exploring how the cohort model moves the needle there. And I guess I'm not yet maybe in a place to say, if you get X, Y, and Z folks together, you can, I think we're still kind of learning what's possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the problems with the models like Ace Hardware or Sunkissed Oranges or whoever we chose is those are commodities. And they're, and the owners of the individual stores are dedicated to making money and serving their public in a way that's different than a bookstore, which is also motivated by literacy and trying to engage browsing. And although I would argue that hardware stores are great places to browse, as Lisa knows, because her grandfather had one. And but it's hard to find a model for something. It'd be interesting to find a model for something that's more relevant to bookstores than a hardware store, even though I think opening bookstores and hardware stores is a brilliant idea.
Well, there are definitely spaces for community and all of those things. We've got several questions. Are we trying to recreate the ABA? I know Praveen says, I hope not. I don't think so. I don't think that's what you're talking about, Scott, is replacing or recreating the ABA. And we also have, we also have all the IBAs across the country who are. It's been my experience that ABA really gets heavily populated by people who are exploring the bookstore for the first time, or people who have been in the industry for a long time and are leading. So you kind of get both of those groups. But the IBAs regionally are really where you find all of the booksellers coming together over a long period of time and knowing each other and knowing things. But I don't think we're trying to replace either one of those, or I don't think that's what your proposal is. Am I right?
You're right. Yeah. I've made a conscious effort to try to avoid staying out of their wheelhouse.
Yeah. So, and how to, and this would be more operational or more, yeah.
Well, like I said, I've said a couple of times, this is early days and it's exploratory, and I'm learning a lot just from this conversation. And this is the kind of conversation that I'd like to see continue. I've set up a Facebook group. It's called CommonShelf. So if anybody wants to join the conversation online, please join on there. Because this is exactly the kind of conversation that I'd like to be having, exploring where we can add value and if we can add value.
I think that's a wonderful way to conclude, is an invitation to continue the conversation that you've begun, Scott. You've gotten all our wheels turning in different ways and lots of questions and what if this, then this. And I hope those on the call and those who are listening do continue. And thank you so much for sharing, for creating the white paper, for having these ideas, and for being willing to attempt some forging of new ground for.
Yeah, thank you for the conversation. It's been really enlightening.
Yeah, I think that we should continue on Facebook. We'll also share this video with people, and they can comment there. Well, actually, maybe I'll share the survey, but also people could go to the Facebook group and share more ideas, which I think is really important.
Yeah, please take a minute to do the survey. It just takes 5, 10 minutes, depending on how in depth you want to go. But that would be very helpful to me to get your feedback through the
Facebook
survey.
group?
Certainly.
The Facebook group is CommonShelf.
It's just CommonShelf. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Scott, and everybody else. It's 10 o'clock my time, much later other people's time. And we will continue this conversation. It's a really fascinating and provocative proposal. And I think the real question is, how does the rubber hit the road? Where do you start, Because I think a co-op is a really important solution to some of the problems independent bookstores face. And it's just a matter of getting it, like Praveen said, with some small wins, not necessarily getting Random House to cut their rates for us as a group first. We'll get to that later,
Well, I love the power that is staying in the question. So thank you all for that, and thank you, Steve, for organizing and propelling us forward. So thanks, Praveen. Thanks, Christine, Sherry, Sarah, everybody on the call, and those of you who are listening or watching. So we'll.
Thank you to Steve and Lisa. You guys are just doing a magnificent job of keeping these monthly discussions and finding great speakers and provocateurs to bring to us. So keep it up.
Well,
that's it. Thank you all.
Well, it's a lot to you, Praveen, too, because you've been the speaker the last 3.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay. Have a great day, everybody. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.